at the Library of Distilled Spirits, and I'm so excited to be here with Matt Jennings.
Hi, Allie.
Hello, it's so good to see you, and your new book, Homegrown,
Indeed.
which is your first cookbook. It's all about New England cuisine and your story. Tell me a little bit about the impetus for this book.
It's an amalgamation of a lot of different experiences, from growing up cooking with my parents to moving to Europe for a time to coming back here, cooking on the West Coast, cooking on the East Coast, but always being drawn back to
right. I was
my
say,
roots.
It was always like, gotta come back to New England.
Yeah, always being drawn back to my roots. So I moved to New England for the last time, well, thus far as I know, and decided to kind of settle back home. And so this tells that story of all of those food experiences leading up to now.
So when people think of New England cuisine, they tend to think of, clam chowder or the lobster rolls, but your book is really focused on ingredients. And your chapters are kind of split up a little differently than most books. It starts with dairy rather than like appetizers. So tell me about that and that focus on New England ingredients.
Yeah, well, so, we really wanted to make sure that the book was an expression of place, because places and people is what food is about for me, and the relationships that you develop as a cook or a chef with those things. So it was very important for us to tell the story of the really unique kind of geographic area that New England is, benefiting from both the coastal influence and the inland influence, the mountains, the forests, the farmland, etc. So all of that stuff really adds to the richness and the complexity of the story of food from New England.
And what do you think sort of defines New England cuisine that would surprise people? Because I think from the outside, often it's very seafood based, there's certain ideas, but what do you want to convey in terms of ingredients that people may not be familiar with?
Well, I think, what is interesting about New England is that it's kind of pigeonholed into being heavy food, right? It has like fish and chips and lobster, mayonnaise-based lobster rolls. And
things that are also great.
Chowder. Yeah, of course. And I think that that's an important part of this book, too. We tell those stories. We talk about the nostalgic influence for sure, because it's a huge part of the cuisine.
Yeah.
But there's so many other nuances going on that people miss in that process. So, for me, food is about three things. It's about hyper-seasonality, working within the seasons, because in New England we have this truncated season where we really have to celebrate those 3 or 4 months when everything's coming in from our purveyors.
Yeah.
Regionality, so pulling on those heartstrings that we talked of kind of those foods that are classic to the place, and also the immigrant influence. So Boston has always been a gateway for people coming into this country. The Portuguese influence, the fisherman influence, the Latino influence from the Dominican markets that I grew up near in Jamaica Plain. So it all kind of gets spiked into the story of Homegrown.
And there's also, I think, an interesting thing, because people think of New England cuisine as being one thing, but obviously there's hyper regionality in terms of like specific dishes from Vermont, specific dishes from Rhode Island. I mean, you've had restaurants in Rhode Island, in Boston. I mean, those are very different cuisines. Is that something you also want to convey to people?
Definitely, and we have kind of little breakout stories about all of those things in the book as well. So, we celebrate, for example, Moxie soda from Maine and a beautiful baked beans dish, which is actually complements so well because you get a little bit of that residual sweetness in the beans, and so that works really nicely. We have kind of our expression of steamers on the back deck that I grew up with, in Rhode Island. So, very kind of seasonal summer thing, where we just throw down newspaper and dump a pot of clams out, So all of those things are kind of woven into the story.
And you also come at this, from the chef's perspective, but also as a husband, as a dad, the recipes are not, sometimes with chefs with a restaurant, you see sort of everything from the restaurant and it's very technical, and you've really tried to make this a book for people to use at home. How is that balance of obviously the technique that you use at Townsman, your restaurant in Boston, versus cooking at home?
Well, it was my intent from the get-go that I wanted to create a book that people would cook from. I wanted a book that was going to get used and dusted on with flour and dripped on and put up on the shelf and passed to the next generation and that sort of thing. What I tried to do was create recipes that were for the home cook, but that might be a step or two kind of more interesting. So, not your run-of-the-mill. For example, we have a bolognese recipe, which is a classic recipe, but is great with a little bit of grated aged cheddar on it instead of Parmesan, or things like that kind of filter their way through. the book. So it's about having it be approachable but interesting enough that you want to go back again and again and again.
And what are some of your other favorite recipes for the book that might surprise people that have sort of a New England twist to them?
Well, there's a really cool recipe in there for butter roasted chicken, which is dead simple and delicious. I wanted a classic chicken dish. We have, believe it or not, the meatloaf in there is really great and works awesome. And again, it's like one of those things. It's like, why would a chef put meatloaf in a cookbook? But it's like,
my New England grandmother cooked a lot of meatloaf,
it's
so
delicious.
it's like classic Americana food.
And like like why not? For me, like food should be fun, but it should be accessible and exciting and easy. You know, I want people to cook. I don't want people to open the book and get turned off. So, things like that. We have a beautiful little. Like these little crab sandwiches that are an scallion pancake that are kind of like a hybrid between an English muffin, which is a very New England thing, and a scallion pancake. So it's just like fun little kind of snacks for, canapé for a cocktail party type thing.
How do you feel this book plays for people who say like, oh, I have kids, I can't have complicated things? Like, you're cooking with your kids all the time.
I am, whether they like it or not.
You have to.
And so we had a couple things in here that were really great for the kids as well. We have the mac and cheese, which is like an old staple from my first restaurant, Farmstead, which took on some kind of cult following for whatever reason.
Because mac and cheese is great.
Because mac and cheese is delicious.
And great mac and cheese is worth seeking out.
Right, and in the process of writing the book, like people would start to ask me, hey, are you putting in this? Are you putting in that? And I was like starting to realize that like people really wanted the comforty type stuff. And it was like, yeah, we can do that, for sure. So it's kind of balanced out between some like fun, things. I mean, the last recipe in the book is like a 4-day process maple Pekin duck, which I think is amazing. And we do it in the restaurant. But, the first thing you need to buy on the recipe is a bike pump. So it's like, that's intimidating for people.
So maybe that's more advanced.
Right, maybe that's more advanced. But that's balanced out with things like the mac and cheese or, things like that. So it's a good mix.
Well, the book is Homegrown. You can get it now. Matt Jennings, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.